Welcome to today's TAFE Talks. I'm Teresa Schmidt, the Executive Director of Policy and Governance at TAFE Directors Australia. Today's topic is Powering Future Generations Through Early Childhood Education and Care. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the different lands upon which we meet today. I'm coming to you from Gubbi Gubbi country, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us in the discussion today. If you would like to introduce yourself and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that you're on, please feel free to do so in the chat. Wanya, welcome to you all. In today's session, we will explore the importance of early childhood education and care workforce and the strategies to address the shortage of skilled workers in this industry. But let me first begin by introducing Aware Super, who is one of TDA's valued corporate affiliates. Aware Super is one of Australia's largest profit-to-member super funds dedicated to delivering strong returns, service and advice. With over 1.1 million members, Aware Super is committed to supporting those in the education sector to achieve their best possible retirement outcomes, underpinned by a focus on integrity, innovation and member-first service. Joining us from Aware Super today is Emma Vibert, Senior Partnership Manager. As National Partnership Manager at Aware Super, Emma leads strategic collaborations with association partners to foster engagement opportunities that deliver tangible benefits to members, employers and stakeholders. Emma has 25 years' experience in the for-purpose and financial sectors in stakeholder relationships, business and proposition development. So we're going to hear briefly from Emma before I introduce you to today's panel. Over to you, Emma.
Oh, thanks, Teresa. Hello, everyone. It's a privilege to join you all today as a sponsor of the session. Up front, I'd like to acknowledge the vital role you play as educators and leaders at TAFEs across Australia. Your commitment to quality training, mentorship and innovation is at the heart of building a stronger, more sustainable early childhood sector. We know the early childhood education and care workforce is overwhelmingly female, and that many of your students, and perhaps many of you, face unique challenges balancing work, study and caring responsibilities. These challenges can have a lasting impact not just on career progression, but also on long-term financial security, including superannuation balances. At Aware, we're proud to support educators and care professionals at every stage of their journey. We offer tailored education, advice and support to help women in the sector make the most of their super, whether it's understanding the impact of career breaks, boosting contributions or planning for their retirement. And my call to action for you today is simple. Take advantage of the resources and support available to you. Connect with us at Aware Super at aware.com.au or your own super fund. Ask questions. Make sure your financial wellbeing is a priority because you deserve a secure future just as much as the children and families that you support every day. So thank you for your dedication to the next generation, and I hope you enjoyed today's session.
Thanks, Emma. Now, that leaves me to introduce our panel for today's event. Our first speaker is Professor Peter Hurley, Director of the Mitchell Institute, Victoria University. Professor Peter Hurley is the Director of the Mitchell Institute, an education policy think tank at Victoria University. Peter has deep expertise across the entire education sector, from early childhood to tertiary education and beyond. He has a particular interest in advocating for equitable policy solutions so that the benefits of education can be shared by all. Peter will be joined by Nick Howie, Director, Establishment Centre of Excellence in Early Childhood Education and Care from TAFE SA. Nick is responsible for the implementation and operation of the TAFE SA Centre of Excellence in Early Childhood Education and Care and the National Security TAFE Centre of Excellence. Previously, Nick has led the design, implementation and management of workforce development education solutions for emerging industry sectors, including defence and naval shipbuilding at TAFE SA and KBR Inc. Our third speaker is Sue Wyatt, Manager Education Programs at the Chisholm Institute and Chair of TDA's ECEC network. Sue Wyatt is a highly experienced early childhood educator and vocational education leader with a career spanning over 3 decades across both New South Wales and Victoria. Sue leads Chisholm Institute's Department of Education programs, overseeing the delivery of early childhood and school-age education and care, education support, and training and assessment qualifications. She is deeply committed to sector collaboration and professional currency and is president of the Victorian TAFE Early Childhood and Education Support Network and chair of TAFE Directors Australia National Early Childhood Network. Sue also contributes to several stakeholder advisory and reference groups focused on early childhood education and child safety. Now, before I hand over to Professor Peter Hurley to kick us off, I wanted to let you know that today's session is being recorded and the recording will be made available to everyone who's registered for this TAFE Talk session and on the TDA website. Closed captioning is also available, and if you have questions that you would like to pose to our speakers today, please use the Q&A box throughout the session and we will come back to those at the end. You are very welcome to use the chat for discussion throughout the session, but we won't necessarily be able to monitor that chat for questions. So please make sure you put your burning questions in the Q&A box and I'll come back to those at the end. So it now gives me very great pleasure to hand over to Professor Peter Hurley from the Mitchell Institute to kick off today's discussion. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and thank you, Emma, and thank you everyone for joining us today in what is a really interesting area about early childhood. Now, the first task is to see whether I can share this screen because we have all moved to Teams, and this is Zoom, but I think we're good with this while we're on. Great. So look, let me just begin by also just acknowledging I'm coming from the land of the Kulin Nations, acknowledging elders past and present. I also maybe just want to just mention a few things that it's very nice to be here. I do actually have a background in vocational education training. I have worked in the sector. I always feel like I'm home in a way and among friends. So I'm very pleased to be here to talk about early childhood. And the other thing I just wanted to mention about early childhood is that I am relatively new to it. It's something that I've only really become across as part of my time at the Mitchell Institute. And I'm also just going to turn on my timer. And I find that I just have a lot to talk about with it. So let me just very quickly talk about the Mitchell Institute. As I was mentioned, we're an education policy think tank, cover all parts of the education system. So, early learning, schools, funding, those type of things, vocational education training, obviously higher ed and all the way to lifelong learning. A couple of things is that I am aware that about the difference between, say, the name of childcare and early childhood education and care, and I just want to acknowledge that because I do use the term childcare and it is the childcare subsidy and so on. But just to acknowledge that I know that it is a particular issue that needs to be thought about. And also just to mention about some of the work that we've done at the Mitchell Institute. It's been something that I think has been a very big area at the institute that I work at before I've worked here, because the things around, say, preschool, 2 years are better than one, which is, expanding of preschool. It's a very diverse sector. There's long day care, there's preschools and so on. There's family day care, there's in-home care. It's very diverse. So hopefully I can maybe just my role here is just to give a bit of a background about some of the things that we've been working on and that, to kind of set the scene in a way. So just in terms of the policy context, early childhood is really interesting, I think, if you looked across the education sector, because it's really grown a lot in the past a couple of decades. In a way, it's kind of been built anew. If you think about schools, for instance, they've been around for quite a long time, as have universities. And it's actually been a really big policy priority of government. So if we think about, say, the current Labor government, it's made a big promise about building a universal education system, and early childhood education and care is a big part of that. It also kind of shifts the debate, I think, with policy. Often it's been about costs, and how much is it that a family is paying for early learning. And I'll go through some of the issues, what are the big kind of policy issues as well. The other thing I'd say about this is that I think policy can be different to what people think about education. I think often people think about education, they think about classrooms, and that's certainly part of it. But I mean, you might not recognise some of the discussions that are going on about how education is discussed in that policy environment, because often it's about systems and funding and those type of things, and that's part of the kind of angle that I'm going to take today. And I think it's great because I'll give a bit of that kind of overview, and then maybe we'll kind of focus that discussion as we go through to both Nick and Sue. Albanese did say that this was that early childhood education care was one of his biggest achievements in terms of, or I think it was something like that, or his things that he's most proud of, the changes to it. And I just want to contextualize that and kind of what's happening in this system. So as I start doing that, first thing I just wanted to show here was just actually this massive kind of growth that's happened in what they call formal care. This is a graph that's from the Australian Bureau of Statistics from 1996 to 2017, showing the growth in the number of children aged 0 to 4 years who have attended long daycare in the week prior to the survey. And as you can see, it's gone from, say, 13% to, I can't quite see that because at some point, I think over about 35%. And that was in 2017. So what's going to be happening here is there are more children than ever before who are using this system. It's been a priority of government. There's more subsidies going to it. So there's this kind of major, kind of societal shift here about about the use of early learning in ECEC, and that has been facilitated by a particular approach. So if we look at what is the system design? So if you think about all the different parts of the education system, early learning, you think about schools, vet, higher ed, universities. Early childhood education care is very different, I think, especially the bits that are covered of the system by the childcare subsidy. So that's in particular long daycare and family daycare. That's very different to other parts of the Australian education system. It's actually not too different. If there was going to be one that's the most similar, I would actually say it's the vet sector. It's what's known as a demand side subsidy model. So what that means is that government isn't really involved in the provision, particularly the federal government, of early learning. The government kind of sets up the market, sets up the framework. It provides a subsidy to parents, so it subsidizes the demand through through the childcare subsidy, and as part of that, that subsidizing that demand, supply is created. So places are created, but to respond to that demand. So governments are involved in where centres are located. They have some kind of policies to help the market function properly. That might be subsidies for training and so on. But that's a particular approach. And also you have a mixed market provision. And that's kind of similar to the vet sector as well. You have more private for-profit providers. That's not something you get in the school sector, for instance, where schools can't be for-profit and receive government money. It's also very interesting, I think, in terms of, say, the federal and state and territory involvement, particularly in the bits of the system covered by the childcare subsidy, which is the largest component of it, which is federally. Excuse me, but actually the federal government its primary role is in providing the subsidy as such, but it's not involved necessarily in the regulation. It's actually a state and territory government kind of responsibility. So you've got this kind of overlap, I think, in who's responsible for this. And as part of that, you get this kind of tension, I think, about what is the purpose of early learning or funding early learning. I mean, there's lots of great roles for it. But if you're thinking about government, why are we putting in, say, $12 billion a year as part of this? And I think, my take on this is there's often a bit of a tension between, is this a labour market support program? So is this to help parents get into the workforce? Or is it there? I've got two eyes, that should be one, but supporting child development. Now, the graph I've got up here, I just wanted to show this in terms of if you look at that growth in the number of children using it, that means there has to be growth in the number of places available. And as I mentioned, government really isn't involved. It's okay, we're going to build a childcare centre here. It's up to individual providers to do that. And what this particular graph shows is the growth between 2013 and 2024, I think it is, in the number of places by sector. And what it shows is that the private for-profit providers have grown the most. And in fact, they have been responsible for the largest part of the growth in the system. Now, I'm probably going to be going way over time, so I'm going to go get through it a bit quicker. So I just wanted to show about, say, four different things. What are the four biggest issues in early learning in the policy space? One of them, the biggest one, is cost. In terms of like, okay, what's going to get the most kind of column inches in a media thing? So, okay, well, how much is it costing families? And what this graph shows is the relative cost of early learning of childcare to families using 100 as the midpoint. I think it's around, I can't remember what year it is. But as you can see, there's this kind of increase in the cost of childcare, and then intermittent kind of policies kind of they're bringing in that kind of reset it and bring it down a bit before it increases again. And this big kind of dip here is that free childcare during the COVID period. And yeah, a big thing about, okay, how much is this costing? As I mentioned, this thing about access, some of the work that we've done around childcare deserts, around, okay, well, how much of there is there? What's the relative availability of this thing? Government has relied on providers to open centres in areas and meet that kind of demand that's being created, but that results in varying degrees of access depending on where you live. And in particular, places like regional and rural areas can have much lower levels of childcare, long daycare availability than areas in the richer areas or the more advantaged areas. And this map of Adelaide, you get this around the country. You see this green in the centre where there's more kind of places available, and the further out you get, there's less access or less places available, and then there's pockets of green around the place. And I just wanted to put up something here, just showing the average fees that are charged by socioeconomic area. And as you get into more advantaged areas across the country, the average fee that is charged gets higher. So even though the childcare subsidy system is about providing more subsidies to those families who earn less, you get more of a subsidy if you earn less. If you're a provider, you get more money by operating in a more advantaged area, and that's just part of the kind of the strange kind of incentives that sit in the system. This one I could talk about forever, and it's about quality, and it's about this idea of we often think of quality. It's often a big issue in early learning. We think of quality as this thing of like low versus good, or low versus high, or good versus bad. But also similar to the vet system, if we think about, say, a unit of competency and so on, part of the quality regime is to ensure there's a system where there's the same thing is being produced. So nominally, like a unit of competency in one area by one RTO is the same as a unit of competency produced by another RTO, even though we know that that's not the case. People who've worked in the system and know what's involved in that. But this also, I think, happens a bit in the early learning sector. And that can have implications about, well, I mean, who does this system reward? The ones that can produce this unit of care in the most efficient way possible. And just to highlight that safety in ECEC settings has really dominated reporting recently, and something that's become a big issue. And this graph we have here on the right, just showing this idea about the quality is often looking at this idea of child development and so on. And basically this just looks at, say, okay, if you look at where children are and their scores on these developmental kind of, all these different measures that they have, by the time they reach primary school, those kind of socioeconomic things have started to become really apparent, those kind of trajectories. So those from more advantaged areas are scoring higher on average than those from less advantaged areas. And it highlights, I think, that importance of, really kind of equalizing things that are happening later on in the education system, really have to be focused on in the early learning area. I think I've got one more, which is probably the most important thing for this discussion. It's about this issue of workforce. So what are the big issues? There's quality, price, access, and workforce is obviously another one of them. It's a very crucial element to the early childhood ECEC area. ECEC is a very diverse workforce. There's some figures there just about looking at the type of people who are in the figures around the different occupations and the age. Like other industries from a similar model, aged care, that type of thing, attracting and keeping a workforce is a concern. There's also this idea of significant churn. This is the idea that there's a lot of movement in people coming in and out of the sector, which can, in some sectors, that can be good, but I think in a sector like early learning, that can be a detriment. And the final slide is just around what the biggest things are that we're looking at, and there are just some things there about what's happening and what are the big policy issues. But there's been a recent Productivity Commission report, and I think coming out of that, there's still this big question. All right, so there's a lot of support for early learning. It's something that people want to succeed. They want children to have the best start in life. The question becomes how to do it, and how to do it in this system this is where we are in this system. And I think when we hear about the Centre of Excellence and other things, you can see these kind of government policies trying to promote the sector. So look, I'm going to end it there. I think I have gone over time, and I apologise, but I'm going to hand it over to Nick, who's going to speak to us about one of those centres of excellence. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Peter. Now I'll do the same thing as you and make sure my technology is working. Bring up my sharing. Okay. That looks like it's working as well. So yeah, I'm Nick Howie. I'm the Director of Centre of Excellence Establishment at the TAFE Centre of Excellence in Early Childhood Education and Care. Just very briefly talking about what it is that we do. So as a TAFE Centre of Excellence, we are a joint funded initiative between the Commonwealth and state government, South Australia in this case, that looks at the workforce challenges in the early childhood education and care sector, and ways that we can work through the vocational education and training sector to support outcomes for the workforce. That can be through either increasing accessibility to existing training programs and looking at new and different ways of doing things, or looking at where there are gaps in the knowledge and skills or emerging changes and challenges, and developing content to address those gaps. We also work with the TAFE network more broadly. So the product that we develop, the intent of that is once we've piloted and tested it and made sure it's working, we'll work with the TAFE network and TAFEs in other jurisdictions to roll out that training across the country. So thanks to Teresa for the acknowledgement of country. I'd just also like to acknowledge that I'm presenting from the lands of the Kaurna people, and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and recognise them as the traditional custodians on the land of which I'm presenting. And I'd also like to reinforce that there is great opportunity through the early childhood education and care sector to incorporate that cultural knowledge and cultural safety into children's learning at that very early stage of life, that will hopefully flourish through their further years. The project that I'd really like to talk about today is the vocational degree in early childhood education that we're looking at, well, we are working on. This is probably one of our key initiatives, in that we are developing a new qualification type. So the vocational degree was introduced into the AQF in about March of this year. It is a degree level qualification, so AQF level 7, but within the vocational education and training sector rather than higher education. The intention that we're working through is that this type of product will enable apprenticeship delivery at that higher level, through the vet sector. And really keen to see an alternative competency-based development pathway for early childhood teachers, rather than relying on the academic pathways that exist now. We do see this as a complementary educational product, so not looking at replacing those offerings that are run through universities, but for those students and learners that are more attuned to working on job and demonstrating competency through action and learning, this should be a pathway that supports them. So we've done some research into employment-based degrees, and I'll talk about that through our next slide as well. The intention is that it is accredited through ASQA at the moment, so we've submitted a course concept proposal to them, which they're considering at the moment, and then we'll continue the development more broadly and put that submission through. And we're working quite closely with the Department of Employment and Workforce Relations on sort of the policy settings that I'll talk about in a bit as well. The intention of this qualification is that it meets all of the ECEC requirements, and we're working closely with the South Australian Teachers Registration Board in relation to requirements in South Australia, but are having conversations more broadly about how the regulatory environments in other jurisdictions are supported. A core element of this program is going to be that co-teaching period, very similar to teacher residency models. And at the moment, the kind of feedback is steering us towards block training, though that's something that can be worked through more into the future. So at the moment, we have scoped out some content. We've started developing some of those units of competency as well. We expect it'll be a 3 to 4 year program when delivered through an apprenticeship model, commencing in the first year with diploma equivalent content, either direct units of competency from the diploma that are appropriate for early childhood teachers, or adjusted content that's adapted for more the early childhood teacher role, but generally equivalent to the outcomes of the diploma. As students would progress through the qualification, we'd be looking at moving them into co-teaching opportunities later in second years, bringing content on working with neurodiverse and autistic children. Trauma-informed practice is something that's been highlighted as really important. We'd like to bring elements such as nurturing creativity through visual expression, music and drama, and a lot of the play-based learning themes as well. Also work on building identities and knowledge, so culture, curriculum, and communication, building the foundations from a teaching perspective, so life skills and building connections, and then social development and collaborative support through that second year as well. And then third and fourth years of the program really focusing on the teaching standards, advanced concepts in curriculum and care, service management, service leadership, and of course that real practical experience that a learner would go through that employment-based degree. So if I talk now a little bit about the models that we've looked at in the United States primarily. We've also looked at some emerging models in the UK that are sort of in the early stages, not quite at the evaluation point. But we're seeing improved outcomes over academic institution-based delivery pathways in the US. The teacher residency model seems to be quite popular. And degree apprenticeship programs are more common in the UK and US across a range of industries too. Really the outcomes we think would be improved from that workplace readiness perspective towards the end of the qualification as well. There's also a lot of the research that's finding that employment-based degrees increase enrollments and completion rates. There's strong intention of staff to remain in the sector once they finish as well. And of course that earn while you learn component is really attractive. So as someone is working through their apprenticeship, they are earning an income while they are studying as well, as opposed to kind of taking on that debt for their academic study. The opportunity for learners that wouldn't traditionally go to universities is also a real potential benefit of such a program. So these programs can appeal to people who wouldn't typically consider a uni qual. They may be regionally based, they may be first in family, and First Nations Australians as well. And that combination of professional experience with study, like as I said before, can increase the quality of graduates and sort of fast track their progression to being really proficient. The reason that we're doing this, we've got some Jobs and Skills Australia data on the screen now, showing that significant growth that's required across the country. So we definitely think there is a place for a new type of offering and doing things differently to help enhance those numbers. Really, we do want to encourage people that may not consider that pathway to look at an alternative approach to coming into the sector. A lot of things we need to consider through this as well, and we're having lots of feedback from the sector, regulatory bodies, unions, and things too. Where do degree level apprenticeships fit within the Australian apprenticeship system at the moment? Is there the opportunity for them, for people going through those apprenticeships to access incentive payments at that level? Are the Australian apprenticeship connect providers able to support apprentices going through the program too. And we're doing a lot of work now to understand the benefits to employers and then promote that more broadly, create a space for unions and employers to have discussions around the award conditions that would be required for such a program as well. And really importantly, looking at what is an appropriate tasking and level of responsibility for a learner as they progress through the qualification, particularly through an apprenticeship style program. On top of that, we also have to look at the various declaration processes within each jurisdiction. We'll start in South Australia to get that running here, and then look more broadly about what we can do to support other jurisdictions to uptake the type of apprenticeship that we're working on. Another aligned program that we're working on, so again, focusing on that workplace-based delivery and assessment type model and the earn while you learn, is we had some trainees sign up last week to the pilot of our new delivery and assessment methodology that we're rolling out that's a lot more flexible. We've identified that there are a number of barriers to people undertaking diploma qualifications through traineeships at this time. Workload pressure, long shifts. Some people do have to do it through an institutional educational pathway, which means they may need to leave the workplace for a period of time to undertake their study as well. So if we can increase that traineeship uptake, they have that ability to learn while earning. RPL processes, we've got some work to do around that. They're viewed as incredibly complex, and entry to the diploma can be seen as burdensome through that as well. And regional staff and travel. I saw some reporting on ABC today that again talks about people needing to travel from regional areas into the city being problematic. We've seen that there's a preference for clustered delivery at the moment. Local delivery options are also wanted. On-site is still a component, so how do we minimize that but maximize its impact to the learners going through, and how do we allow services to have more say in how the training is integrated into what people are doing on the job and the learning opportunities there as well. So the model that we've got, really strong upfront recognition of prior learning, working through what that workplace-based learning and assessment looks like specifically for each service, complementing that with self-paced online modules, and scheduling some workshops and different styles of drop-in for people to learn and access that facilitated support as well. Units we cluster into themes. Safety, obviously incredibly topical at the moment, but pedagogy, inclusion, trauma-informed practice, and professional compliance. And over the long term, we'd really like to see that increase of trainees going through the system at the diploma level and upskilling. Hopefully that will help with retention and reducing some of that churn that Peter referenced earlier as well. Just to very briefly touch on a few of the other things that the Centre of Excellence is working through. So we're in pilot for a few of our developments at the moment. So understanding autism in early childhood education and care, and our mentoring for leadership programs are in their post-pilot evaluation phase. So we've completed a bit of delivery of that new product, and we're assessing what the outcomes are and looking at what further work we would do before rolling that out more broadly across the country. We have some great work in the APY lands in far north South Australia, looking at assessment methodologies that support the Ananu learners out there, as well as using language to translate key concepts that are taught in the Certificate 3. We have an online short course that is available now that is free for people considering coming into the sector, and a bit of a day in the life of what it's like to work in a service. And then we're doing some work around some grants for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander early childhood education and care initiatives, looking at behaviours that challenge and how we can support educators at the Cert 3 level as well. And then we're continuing to add work on RPL, looking at withdrawn students, child safety, and simulated environments. I understand the presentation will be sent out later on, so QR code there will be on it, which will give you access to more information on what we're doing. And we're really keen to keep seeing the sector's voice come through the work that we're doing, and working closely with the TAFE network. So on that note, I will hand over to one of my peers, Sue, who works quite closely with us as well. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks very much, Nick. Now, I'll have to try and share. I think we need you to stop sharing first.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'll just quickly share my screen as well. Hopefully you've got that all now. So thank you, everybody. My name's Sue Wyatt from Chisholm Institute, and just to explain to you a little bit about who we are, for those of you that don't know, in Victoria, we don't sit under the title of TAFE Vic, like you do in TAFE New South Wales or TAFE SA or TAFE Queensland. So Chisholm Institute is a Victorian TAFE, and we're located in the southeast of Victoria, sitting on the Bunurong country. So acknowledging all of our elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming to you today from Gadigal country of the Eora Nation in Sydney, as well as I'm here for a conference. So just wanted to acknowledge the land that I'm on here today as well. So beautiful segue from Professor Hurley's work, as well as Nick's, onto traineeships, and talking about also that churn of staffing and the number of places in early childhood for staff and meeting that demand. So Chisholm was very fortunate to be able to engage with the Victorian government for 2022 to 2024 on a traineeship program. So this program was a tender that we applied for and were successful in obtaining, and the Victorian government had a few issues post-COVID, and that was around, like possibly in other states, a real lack of staff working in the sector. A lot of people had left in COVID, and in Victoria especially, there was a 10-year low unemployment rate. So there were people moving around workforces, and jobs were really everybody was competing for the same worker. So early childhood was in a particular sticky spot. In addition to that, the Department of Education had also rolled out some early childhood initiatives, which were really gratefully received by the sector, but it also put another strain onto workforce demand. And so there was increase in 3-year-old kindergarten. They rolled that out, as well as increasing hours for 4-year-old kinder, which meant on top of an already skill shortage, early childhood was really needing to upskill and gain some workers into the sector very fast. We were hearing things of, centres having to close rooms because there weren't enough staff on the day to open for parents, and so parents not being able to go to work themselves. So it was a real problem. So the government came up with a concept that if they could get job seekers into the workforce, then that would help solve that problem, and they could engage in traineeships. So this particular project had 2 arms of government. So it was kind of unique to any project that most people run, and it was funded by Jobs Victoria. So Jobs Victoria, their aim was to get people into the workforce. So they were after jobs. Whereas the Department of Education, which are the ones who rolled out the education reforms in early childhood, they were the ones who administrated the program. So they were also saying, well, we don't just want jobs, we want quality jobs and we want quality outcomes for children. So we had two bosses really during this project. So for us, we were able to only target job seekers. Like I mentioned before, in Victoria, there was a real skill shortage across multiple disciplines. So we weren't able to recruit people that were already employed, because what we'd be doing then would be disrupting another market, which we weren't able to do. So we had to really focus on priority cohorts, which are job seekers. So some of those people were long-term unemployed, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, young people, so culturally diverse candidates, and women. So they were the people that we were targeting particularly through our marketing. So I won't say on this slide for very long, but just for those of you who possibly aren't across the difference between traineeships and apprenticeships. So they are that earn and learn model, what Nick was talking about with a degree apprenticeship, but we were looking at Certificate 3 and diploma, mostly Certificate 3, and as a base, as an entry level for these job seekers to start working in early childhood. And like Nick mentioned, and I think it was a really important point, in early childhood, children don't all learn the same, and we know that. So we can't expect all of our adult learners to learn the same. Perhaps classroom teaching doesn't suit everybody. Perhaps that hands-on learning on the job is something that needs to be considered more. So it's great to see what you're doing, Nick, with the degree apprenticeship. So the traineeships is pretty much the same as an apprenticeship. You learn on the job, but you also have to do a course through an RTO. And traineeships are generally the same as apprenticeships, but less duration. So, and they tend to be things for non-trades like business courses, early childhood, but not your typical things like hairdressing and carpentry. And they're a great way to get people quickly engaged into a workforce. So basically, this is probably one of the hero slides I've got to show you today, and it's about how we did this concept, this traineeship, with a best practice model. As you could see, we were working with job seekers, and some of them were long-term unemployed, and people with diverse needs and complex backgrounds. So we really needed to put in a really nice holistic concept and a holistic model that would support the whole person to be able to be successful. It wasn't just about getting them a job and then walking away. It was about helping them to actually get the job and then helping them to stay in the job, helping them complete their studies, all those wraparound supports. So if you're probably reading through the slides already, but one of the things that the Department of Education wanted us to do is they didn't want that, that tick and flick model, which of course at TAFE we would hopefully never ever do, but they wanted our learners to come to class, because one of the challenges is with traineeships, they may only ever see one service and not speak to anybody outside that service. So we wanted them to come to class where they actually had the release time to do their study, but also to talk to other trainees and learn a little bit about different workplaces. They didn't want the trainees included in ratio for at least the first 12 weeks to just allow them that softer landing where the pressure isn't on them, where they could watch, observe, and get to know what early childhood was like before they were included in ratio. We're lucky in Victoria that we have free TAFE, but free TAFE is the tuition, but there's also materials and amenities and things like that. So we waived all of those fees as well. So everything was covered by the project funds, including their Working with Children's check. We also have provided a mentoring program as well. So that person has a mentor as well that while they're working, they can call anytime and talk to if they've got any concerns. We've ended up in a situation where we've had to sort of be a little bit of an advocate between the employer and the trainee, especially when some of the employment conditions were perhaps a little questionable. So we've sort of been that middle person and provided a voice for both. There was, interestingly, in this first iteration of the project, it was a time when there was a 10% federal wage subsidy if you took on a trainee. So that was quite lucrative for services, and it was a great incentive. But this project also provided a subsidy for employers. So if they took on a trainee to the completion, they got $4,000. And if the trainee completed the course, they got $4,000 as well. So there was a lot of incentive around that. We had a really great project team, and they were providing always those check-ins with the trainee as well as the employer. So there were always touch points with them. There was a job readiness program. So before they started, we provided through a Learn Local. We thought we'd take ourselves out of the equation and get a neutral person to deliver that. It was called Gaining the Edge. So it was a little bit around job readiness. And we tackled things like how to be at an interview, how to present professionally, but also that resilience piece, which we're hearing time and time again our learners need. So there's a lot of resilience training and expectations, how to behave, how to show initiative, that type of stuff, just basic skills. We also had a little bit of extra funding to remove some barriers, things like some learners may not have had a laptop. We've paid for taxi fares for people to get to interview. We've bought shoes for them to wear to work so that they've got decent shoes to wear on the job, maybe some clothes, those sorts of things. There was one student who was a mature age student and her self-esteem was really low. So we were able to send her to our hairdressing department and give her a little bit of a makeover to boost her confidence so she felt good for that interview, those sorts of things. There were also we worked with our local TAFEs as well. So that's a really important part of this as well, is to say that we didn't keep all the students. We were statewide. So if a TAFE, one of our other TAFEs wanted to be involved, we would actually send the students to do the study component through them. We were just the initial matching with employers. So what we did is we basically were recruitment and matching. I often make the joke, it was kind of like a dating service. So we got employers who were interested and we got trainees that were interested, and then we kind of tried to marry them up. So one of the big heroes of this was the marketing budget. Because we had a solid marketing budget for this, that was really, I can't tell you how crucial that was to able to attract applicants. And we're lucky that we had a team that were able to then drill it down to what was getting the most clicks and what things were trending more, and then the next iteration of marketing, they would turn their attention to those things and discard the things that weren't successful. So it was always that action research as we went. We really did, and our traineeship team, I know some of them are here, so I can't congratulate them enough that the work that they did on making sure that they fit people with, got to know the employer, got to know the trainee applicant, and put them together to the ones that fit them better. We did lots of interview preparation, job readiness, all that sort of stuff. And that was a team of 4 staff. And as you can see there, I didn't mention also that we were the original program, we were asked to get 150 applicants and match them to 150 trainees. So what we ended up with is we conducted over 1,000 interviews. In those 1,000 interviews, we arranged 700 plus job interviews. Now you're wondering, between the 1,000 to the 700, many were not eligible to work in Australia, so they weren't able to be included. So that's where there's a difference. 520 were accepted into paid employment. We did have some that just were no-show though. And 479 commenced employment. You'll see 450 there in brackets. That was because 29 of them didn't fill in the disclaimer to be able to be officially reported on. We also worked with employers, so we had fortnightly information sessions that we ran for 2 years for people who were interested in joining the program. I mentioned the incentive payments before. We had mentoring agreements with services. So to get that incentive, they had to commit to mentor that trainee as well. And we also did a whole lot of pre-screening and service rating. So we weren't sending potential trainees to services that weren't meeting standards. Now, it all sounds very lovely, but there, of course, there were challenges. And so in full disclosure, some of the challenges, like I said, it was a job shortage period. There was also a 10% wage subsidy, which meant that the ASINs, the apprenticeship sign-up networks, were run off their feet, and there were delays in getting people signed up. Sometimes it was taking months. So that was creating considerable frustration. So to counteract that, we got permission from the government to be able to unofficially start training with these people. So we would run Zoom classes, teaching them stuff unofficially, just to keep them learning while they're on the job. We did have a 50% attrition rate. It's consistent with national trends. Anybody that works in the TAFE sector in early childhood knows that it always has had a fairly solid attrition rate. And I think that's around expectations versus reality of working with children. It's not just sitting in the same pit singing songs, is it? We expected that we'd recruit 150 people, and then after that, then that 150 would very, very quickly, we'd go to mentoring, but we were constantly replacing recruiting, doing it all at the same time. I'm just very conscious of time, so I'm going to speed up my speaking. You can read on there some of the challenges, but, complex needs, trainees not getting study release time because services were really struggling to do that. So we put on night classes, all those sorts of things. But one thing we did learn is trainees working with the individual, trying not to make them fit into a box, trying to make the box fit them was really, really important. And that's kind of what Nick was alluding to with the degree apprenticeship as well. Here's some of the lessons that we learned. If you're aiming for targets, always aim way higher to allow for attrition. Removing barriers and getting funding for those extra things has really made all the difference in the world. Putting support around people. I'm at a conference at the moment with a CEQA, and the same things are coming through is educator wellbeing, educator support. It's critical that we put all those wraparound things in place. Don't just throw people out there into the workforce and expect that they're going to thrive. Constantly adapting our program. You know, what it started out in 2022 is not how it finished up in 24. We were constantly adapting our marketing, adapting our rules, adapting how we deliver, all of those things. This will be on the website, so if you go back, you'll be able to see these slides about the different changing lives. But look, we've had some amazing applicants and people that have really come from really complex and really from struggle street, bless them. And this has really got them to it's not only just given them an income, it's really helped them in their self-worth, their self-belief. It's changed their trajectory. And we're exceptionally proud of that, especially with some of our migrant students that have come as refugees. We've had career changes. We've had a 76-year-old gentleman graduate from the program, all sorts of diversity. And it's really been one of the biggest learning points for me is to don't try and put people into a box and challenge your stereotypes and your bias, because there's some real hidden diamonds out there. So some of the implications for our sector is obviously working with government, employers, TAFEs, all your students, all of that working together, we can achieve amazing things. You know, we obviously need more research into the retention and career pathways. We do need those holistic models, and that funding has been absolutely critical to our success. So in conclusion, I can actually say at the end of 2024, we were lucky enough to be to apply for another tender, and we got another 3 years of the program. So we're still going, and we've got pretty much the same staff, which has been I think that's been a real success factor for us, is that stability of staff as well. We're lucky. At the end of 24, we'd had 47 complete, and then 191 were still engaged with their studies. We were able to hit over 300% target, which is great. It's informed future workplace initiatives, which is really nice. And, you know, those inclusive supported traineeship models really do work. Quality training is important. And, you know, what we've seen now is we've helped that pipeline move along, which has been a real privilege for us. So very, very proud of this project, and really, really proud of the team for what they've achieved. So acknowledgements, I have to acknowledge on here Siobhan Siglecki, who helped me write this program. She's our state leader of this project, as well as the traineeship team as well. Like they've given many of their own personal hours and their heart, blood, sweat and tears to this program. The Victorian Government, the Department of Education, Jobs Victoria, all those services, early childhood services who tried something different and trusted us, it's been amazing. All the other TAFEs in Victoria as well, and our team. And thank you very much for this opportunity. If you want to contact me, there's my details. But thank you so much. It's been a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to Peter for setting the scene and I guess, giving us a really good idea about where all the problems might be, and we've got a bit of a wicked problem, I guess, in terms of trying to build our workforce and also trying to get the right people and the right capabilities. And then Nick's come in with some solutions that are coming out, or some proposed solutions that are being developed in the ECEC Centre of Excellence. And Sue's come in with a grassroots approach that has been tried, and you've identified lots of I guess, reproducible impacts from that hopefully others will be able to replicate, given if they can, I guess, get provided with the kinds of supports that's needed. So thank you for that. Now, we do have a couple of questions. I've got one that's a really easy one here, I hope. It is anyway, Nick. One for you, which is really quite direct. What is the time frame for the delivery of the vocational degree? When will it start being offered?
So we have a target, but maybe not as straightforward to necessarily get there. We would be hoping that we'll be able to offer it from the start of 2027, but that's, you know, subject to all the approvals and regulatory bodies that need to look at that. And then once the curriculum itself is developed, we need to switch to looking at the best delivery and assessment methodologies and building all those learning resources as well. So that will all take some good time to get some good sector involvement in that as well.
Thanks, Nick. Now, I'm aware that you're talking today about, very focused in on the ECEC workforce. Nick did talk about, a whole suite of range of programs, which is about not just uplifting capability, but also addressing very particular childhood needs within that sector. I guess one of the questions that we are asked is, how do we ensure that we are meeting that tension between getting more people into the ECEC workforce and also getting the right people, ensuring that we are supporting children, so that we're supporting the end users of the program. So I'm going to open that up to is there anyone in particular who, like, if you could have if you had a closing. Yes, Peter, I can see you've just
I'm off mute.
yes,
Look,
I thought
and there's a
you've
question.
got something to say.
Yeah, no. I think the early childhood area is a very interesting one. I mean, the system is set up and in a way that Australia gets a lot of it for a relatively, small amount of money. And actually, it's interesting. I think that one of the things I've kind of seen with the early childhood area is that it's the way it's designed is not that different from other kind of like aircraft industries or retail or something. There's a whole set of series of like very sophisticated ways to kind of produce this thing in the most efficient way possible, and that has some impacts on it. And one of those that we're dealing with a lot of the wages aspect of it, the turnover aspect of it. There's a question there around, say, well, government's putting a lot of money into this. Well, government puts a lot of money into a lot of things. It's about $12 billion into the early learning area, and it's about $60 billion into schools. What I think is really important here is finding a way to change it. There's this thing about, okay, well, how is it that we can make this child-centered? I totally agree with this, and also one of the things I've certainly come across in working in the early learning area, come across with it, is just the dedication that everyone has to this, and I think it's important to find ways, and that's part of the next step in these challenges, is how is it that we can support people in the workforce to do the job that they need to do, and that might cost a bit more than what we're doing at the moment, but it's very important.
I might just add, Teresa, as well. The child is absolutely at the focus of the work that we're doing, and I know Sue will reiterate that. We are very keen to evaluate the benefits to the children of the programs that we implement as well, because they are absolutely central to what we're doing.
Thanks, Nick. Sue, did you have anything to add?
Oh, just to reiterate that, I'm at the ECEC conference at the moment, and there very much is a focus on child wellbeing as number one and educator wellbeing as number two. And I know through the program that we've developed with this second iteration, there's a lot more discussion with learners, as you see, that there's always a high attrition rate. So it's making sure that they're very, very aware of what they're signing up for. And as we know, a lot of people think that they are, and I think we'll always have that attrition. I think it's recognising if it's not suitable for you to maybe redirect that learner to maybe another program as well. So we often find at TAFE that, students who are saying, oh, I don't think this is for me, we can, it doesn't mean that all is lost, is redirecting them. Maybe it's education support, or maybe it's working in a different care sector, but making sure that we support learners to find the thing that they're interested in. But definitely, if you're not prepared to put the child at the centre, then you shouldn't be in the industry.
Thanks, Sue. So, okay, so it is a tricky conundrum that I can see you've all thought deeply about, and I guess we are looking for different approaches, a multi-pronged approach to resolving this dilemma, which is, I think, there's no perfect solution, is there? I think Peter really raised that importance of the sector, in shifting the demographic of disadvantage, and you've seen from Sue's presentation the difference that being able to gain entry into this workforce can have for somebody, and then potentially with a suitable pathway to support them into further capability building as well, is all really hopefully a great approach that we might see results in a few years, but it's not going to happen overnight, obviously. thank you to all of you for working hard on this. I think there's very little time left. I just need to let you thank the audience as well for your participation, thank Aware Super, and of course our wonderful panel, Peter, Nick and Sue. And I'm hoping to see you in 2026 for our next TAFE Talk series, and perhaps the TDA convention in 2026, which will take place from the 5th to the 7th of May at the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre. More information on our website. Thank you again for your support of our TAFE Talks in 2025, and see you next year.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.